Picture a stretch of coastline that looks completely empty. No buildings, no bases, nothing but rock and cliff face. Then part of that cliff opens up, and a dozen fast boats come shooting out toward open water, gone before anyone even knows what happened. That's not fiction. That's a real tactic Iran has been using for years, and this week the US military went after it in a way that's got everyone talking. Most people scanning satellite images of Iran's southern coastline would see nothing worth a second look. Just rock, cliffs, and empty shoreline stretching for miles. That's exactly the point. What looks like nothing is actually one of the most dangerous pieces of military infrastructure in the entire region, and almost nobody outside defense circles knew it existed until recently. For roughly 2 decades, Iran's naval forces have been quietly carving fortified tunnel and cave complexes straight into the rock along its southern coast and on a handful of strategic islands sitting inside the world's most contested waterway. These aren't random hiding spots. They're purpose-built shelters designed to hide fast attack boats, close enough to the water that they can launch in minutes, then vanish back into the rock before anyone can respond. Analysts who track this kind of infrastructure believe Iran has built a significant number of these hidden bases, each one engineered with piers cut directly into the stone so boats can dock, hide, and launch again almost instantly. Here's why this matters so much. A regular warship is a massive target. It shows up clearly on radar. It's visible from satellites, and once a real conflict starts, it's relatively easy to find and destroy. That's actually what happened to a large part of Iran's conventional navy in the opening weeks of this war. But a small, fast boat sitting inside a carved-out cave under a rock overhang is basically invisible from above. It doesn't show up the way a ship does, and unless you already know exactly where to look, there's almost nothing in standard surveillance footage that separates a real hideout from just another stretch of empty coast. Now let's talk about why this specific threat has stayed relevant for so long, because the timeline here tells you everything. In the earliest phase of this war, coalition air power went hard after Iran's visible naval assets, ports, coastal missile positions, known bases, all hit fast and hit hard. Within the first few weeks, independent estimates suggest a large majority of Iran's visible fast attack fleet had been destroyed or damaged. On the surface, that looks like a devastating blow to Iran's naval power, and in a lot of ways it was. But here's the twist that most coverage completely missed. Even after that early destruction, a meaningful chunk of Iran's remaining fast boats kept operating just fine, because they were never sitting in the kind of exposed spots that got the surface fleet wiped out. They were tucked away underground the entire time, protected specifically by the fact that they were never visible targets to begin with. So while headlines were celebrating the destruction of Iran's navy, the real core of its coastal strike capability was sitting safely hidden, completely untouched. This is exactly the setup that makes this week's story so important. Because if you don't understand what these hidden bases actually are and why they've survived months of sustained bombing, you can't really understand what just happened or why it matters. So over the next few sections, we're going to break down exactly what's confirmed to have happened this week, why these caves have been so hard to fully destroy, and what the honest, unexaggerated picture actually looks like right now. Because there's a lot of dramatic language flying around online, and separating what's real from what's just noise is exactly the point of this breakdown. Forget everything you think you know about how this war started, because the opening chapter isn't the one that matters right now. What matters is what happened just days ago, and a lot of people online are getting it completely wrong. When this conflict first broke out, the air campaign went hard after Iran's navy right out of the gate. Ports, coastal missile positions, no naval bases, all of it got hit fast and hit hard. Within the first few weeks, a large chunk of Iran's visible fast attack fleet was either destroyed or badly damaged. On paper, that sounds like a knockout blow. A navy losing most of its fast attack boats in a matter of weeks should mean the threat is basically over. But here's the part that never made it into most headlines. Even after that early destruction, a big share of Iran's remaining fast boats didn't disappear. They were never sitting out in the open in the first place. They were tucked away inside the hidden cave network we just talked about, completely untouched by that early wave of strikes because they were never visible targets to begin with. So while the world was celebrating the destruction of Iran's surface navy, the actual core of its coastal strike capability was sitting safe underground the entire time. That brings us to now. Over the past week or so, multiple confirmed strike operations have hit military facilities tied directly to this hidden coastal network. Officials have described these operations as targeting coastal defense systems, missile storage sites, and surveillance infrastructure spread across several key locations known to be connected to the cave bases. This is real. This is documented. This is not speculation. But now I want to slow down, because this is exactly where a lot of channels start exaggerating, and I refuse to do that to you. Scroll through social media right now and you'll see people claiming the tunnels themselves, the actual carved-out boat pens, finally got cracked open and destroyed this week. That would be a massive story if true. It would mean the core of Iran's hidden fleet capability just got wiped out in one operation. Here's what's actually confirmed. The strikes hit the military footprint surrounding these hidden facilities. Defense systems, storage buildings, surveillance equipment, the support structure that keeps these bases running. What is not confirmed, at least not in any reporting that's actually been verified, is a direct breach of the hardened cave systems themselves, the deep rock tunnels where the boats are actually stored. That distinction matters a lot. Hitting the surrounding support system is a real and meaningful hit. Claiming the tunnels themselves got cracked open is a much bigger claim, and right now, the evidence just doesn't support it. So why does this distinction matter so much? Because it changes what this week's strikes actually mean. If the tunnels were breached, we'd be talking about a genuine turning point, a moment where Iran's hidden boat capability took a real structural hit. But if it's the surrounding footprint that got hit, then what we're really looking at is another round of pressure on a system that is still fundamentally intact underneath. Damaged around the edges, yes. Broken at the core, not yet. At least not according to what's actually been verified. This is the pattern that's defined this entire coastal campaign for months now. Real strikes, real damage, real pressure, but never quite the decisive blow that fully shuts the door on this hidden threat. That pattern is exactly what makes this specific corner of the war worth paying close attention to, because it tells you something bigger about how this whole conflict is likely to keep unfolding. Here's a question worth sitting with for a second. If a country's entire coastal military infrastructure has been under attack for months, why is a network of caves carved into rock still functioning like nothing happened? The answer isn't luck. It's engineering, and it's one of the toughest problems in modern warfare. Start with the basic physics of the problem. A regular building collapses when a bomb goes off nearby. The shockwave alone can bring down walls and ceilings, but a facility carved directly into solid rock doesn't work that way. The rock itself is acting like armor, meters and meters of dense natural stone standing between the surface and whatever is stored underneath. Even the most advanced bombs built specifically to punch through hardened targets can struggle here, depending on exactly how dense and thick that surrounding rock actually is. You're not fighting a structure. You're fighting a mountain. That alone would be hard enough, but there's a second layer to this problem that makes it even worse. These facilities aren't built with just one entrance. They're built with multiple entrances and multiple internal chambers on purpose. That means even if you manage to seal off one entry point completely, whatever is stored deeper inside can often keep functioning through another route entirely. Imagine trying to shut down a building by locking one door while every other door and window stays wide open. That's roughly the scale of the problem facing anyone trying to fully neutralize a facility built this way. Now, let's talk about the people actually using these bases, because a hidden cave network is only as dangerous as the crews trained to use it properly. Specialized naval units connected to this kind of capability reportedly trained constantly in exactly the tactics these caves were built to support: fast deployment, rapid movement, and coordinated group attacks using large numbers of small boats at once. This tactic even has a name in military circles: swarming. Instead of relying on one powerful ship, the idea is dozens of small, cheap boats launching from scattered hidden locations and converging on a target all at once, overwhelming defenses through sheer numbers rather than firepower. This is where the bigger strategic picture comes into focus. Iran has known for decades it can never build a navy that matches a major global power ship for ship. Rather than trying and losing that fight, military planners made a deliberate choice to go a completely different direction: cheap, fast, expendable boats hidden in places that are nearly impossible to fully wipe out. It's not about winning a straight fight. It's about making sure the threat survives no matter how much damage gets done to the more visible parts of the military. But here's a detail that pushes back against the idea that these caves are somehow unbeatable by design. Reporting on Iran's broader underground infrastructure has pointed to something interesting. Some of these networks store equipment relatively close together along connected corridors, without a lot of internal separation between different sections. That matters, because if a strike manages to hit exactly the right internal spot, it could potentially set off a chain reaction that spreads much further through the facility than a single strike normally would. Well, we don't have confirmation this applies specifically to the boat caves, as opposed to other underground sites, but it's a useful reminder. Hardened doesn't automatically mean flawless. And it's not just boats hiding in these caves. This same defensive thinking runs through nearly everything Iran has built along its coast. Tunnel networks storing missiles deeper inland, naval mines scattered through contested waters, and even a modest submarine fleet built specifically for tight coastal operations rather than open ocean battles. None of these pieces are designed to win a direct fight against a stronger conventional navy. They're designed to do one thing very well: make any campaign against them slow, expensive, and exhausting rather than fast and clean. Strip away all the strike footage and the dramatic headlines for a second, and here's the real question this entire story comes down to. Is destroying ships and buildings actually solving Iran's coastal threat? Or is the real fight happening somewhere the cameras can't even reach? Let's talk about the part of this story that gets far less attention than it deserves. The economic side running quietly alongside every strike. A sustained naval blockade affecting Iranian shipping has reportedly cost the country a massive amount in lost trade revenue, a serious blow to an economy that was already struggling under years of sanctions before this conflict even began. Enforcement of that blockade has reportedly intercepted a large number of vessels trying to move through contested waters. At the same time, shipping industry tracking suggests a meaningful number of vessels have still managed to slip past it, so the blockade is doing real damage, but it's not airtight either. Put that together with the strikes on the coastal caves and you start to see the actual shape of this campaign. It's not one single knockout effort, it's two tracks running side by side, direct military pressure on the hidden boat network on one side, and a slow economic squeeze through the blockade on the other. Both aimed at the same long-term goal, wearing down Iran's ability to sustain this fight, even if neither one delivers a single decisive victory on its own. Before we go further, it's worth pausing on something important that's easy to lose sight of in a story this focused on hardware and strategy. Reports from the affected region describe civilian casualties connected to this sustained campaign. These coastal facilities aren't sitting in some completely isolated military zone far from everyday life. They're built into stretches of coastline where ordinary people and ordinary infrastructure exist too. And that reality doesn't disappear just because a target carries military significance. Now here's the myth that really needs correcting, because it's probably the most misunderstood part of this entire story. A lot of people assume that once Iran's conventional navy got wrecked in the early weeks of this war, the shipping threat in the region basically disappeared with it. That assumption is wrong, and defense analysts have been pretty direct about why. The conventional fleet was never really the source of this particular threat to begin with. The real danger was always centered on the hidden, dispersed boat network we've spent this entire video breaking down. Sinking the big, expensive, visible warships barely touched Iran's actual disruptive capability, because that capability was never really built around those ships in the first place. So where does this actually go from here? A purely military solution would mean systematically locating and destroying every single hardened facility along an extensive stretch of coastline, an undertaking that historically ends up taking far longer and costing far more than anyone plans for at the start. A purely diplomatic solution would require Iran's leadership to voluntarily give up exactly the capability that's proven most effective at creating cost and uncertainty for a much larger opponent. A tough ask for any government, especially one already under serious economic strain. The realistic path is probably some mix of both. Continued military pressure slowly raising the cost of maintaining this infrastructure, running alongside diplomatic contact that eventually has to deal with the security concerns driving both sides. So let's land this where we started. What's confirmed, Iran built and maintained an extensive network of hardened cave and tunnel bases, specifically to shelter its fast boat fleet from exactly this kind of sustained campaign. Confirmed, recent strikes have hit coastal defense systems, missile storage, and surveillance infrastructure repeatedly over the past several weeks. Uncertain whether the actual hardened tunnels themselves have been meaningfully breached, since no confirmed evidence of that currently exists in available reporting. What Iran built along its coastline is a genuinely effective, low-cost answer to a problem every smaller military eventually faces. And the fact that it's still holding up this deep into one of the most intense air campaigns in recent memory says a lot about the real limits of air power against infrastructure. This hidden and this spread out. If you want to keep following exactly what's confirmed and what's still just noise on this story, subscribe with notifications on, because this is clearly far from over. Drop a comment and tell me, do you think a system built like this can hold out indefinitely? Or is it only a matter of time before the pressure wins out completely?